The view from the 148th floor of the Burj Khalifa was not just a view, it was a declaration of absolute power. The desert sun hammered against the reinforced glass. I stood with my hands in the pockets of my faded denim jeans. My white t-shirt was wrinkled from the 14-hour flight. To the uninitiated eye, I looked like a lost tourist who had wandered into the wrong room. But the three men in bespoke Italian suits sitting at the glass table behind me knew better. They knew exactly who I was. I was Amara. I was the CEO of Onyx Holdings, and I had just acquired their crown jewel hotel chain for $50 million in cash. One of the investors cleared his throat. He pushed the heavy contract across the polished surface. He said that everything appeared to be in order. He said they were honored to do business with Onyx Holdings. I turned around slowly. I did not smile. I did not rush. I picked up the platinum pen. I signed my name with a quick and sharp motion. The deal was done. $50 million had just moved from my account to theirs. It was the kind of money that could change the fate of a small nation. Yet, I felt nothing. It was just another Tuesday in my world. I walked out of the conference room and down the private corridor. My team was already waiting for me. Elijah, my lead counsel and closest confidant. He handed me a bottle of water. He told me the jet was fueled and ready for the flight to London. He said I needed to rest. I nodded. I was tired, not the kind of tired that sleep could fix. It was a deep settlement of exhaustion in my bones. I had spent the last decade building an empire from dust. I had clawed my way up from nothing. I had fought for every inch of respect I now commanded. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was not the soft pulse of a business email. It was the sharp and insistent buzz of a personal text message. I pulled the device out. The screen lit up with a name that always made my stomach tighten. Bernadette, my mother. I opened the message. There was no greeting. There was no question about my well-being. It was a demand, pure and simple. The text read, Mother needs $15,000 immediately to secure the wedding venue for Trayvon. Do not ask questions. Just transfer it now. This is about family honor. I stared at the screen. The blue light reflected in my eyes. $15,000. To me, it was a rounding error. It was less than I spent on the catering for a single board meeting. But that was not the point. The point was the audacity. The point was that my mother Bernadette and my father Reginald still saw me as nothing more than a walking bank account. To them, I was not the CEO of a multinational private equity firm. I was just Amara, the secretary, the one with the boring office job who somehow always had extra cash lying around. They did not know about Onyx Holdings. They did not know about the $50 million deal I had just closed. They only knew that if they squeezed me hard enough, money would come out. I thought about Trayvon, my older brother, the golden child, the man who was 35 years old and had never held a job for longer than 6 months. He was getting married to Bianca, a woman from a wealthy and elite family, a woman who looked down on us. My parents were desperate to impress her. They were desperate to prove that the family had class. They were willing to bleed me dry to do it. I walked to the elevator. My thumb hovered over the transfer button. I should say no. I should tell them to figure it out. I should tell them that $15,000 does not just appear out of thin air, but I did not. I was tired. I was so tired of the arguments. I was tired of being the villain in their narrative. If I paid, they would leave me alone for a week. That silence was worth the price. I authorized the transfer. The notification popped up on my screen. Sent. $15,000 gone to fund a lie. I put the phone back in my pocket. I told myself it was the last time. I always told myself it was the last time. The elevator descended. My mind drifted to the one place where I actually felt peace, my secret. It was a sprawling estate on Lake Lanier just outside of Atlanta. I had bought it 6 months ago under a shell company. It was a fortress of solitude, a place where nobody asked me for money, a place where I was not a CEO or a daughter. I was just free. I had not told a soul about it. Not even Elijah knew the full extent of the renovations I had commissioned. 30 minutes later, I was in the back of a black sedan heading toward the airport. My phone buzzed again. I ignored it. I assumed it was my mother asking for more, or perhaps Trayvon sending a half-hearted thank you text that was actually a prelude to asking for honeymoon money. But the buzzing did not stop. It was a continuous and rhythmic vibration. A security alert. I frowned. I unlocked the phone. The notification was red and flashing. It was from the smart home system at the Lake Lanier estate. The text was chilling in its simplicity. Intruder detected, main gate breached, unauthorized entry at the front door. My heart hammered against my ribs. I sat up straight. I tapped the notification to open the live camera feed. The video loaded in high definition. The afternoon sun in Atlanta was bright. The image was crisp. I expected to see thieves. I expected to see masked men stealing the artwork or the electronics. I was prepared to call the police. I was prepared to deal with criminals. But I was not prepared for what I saw. The camera feed showed a silver Mercedes SUV parked in my driveway. It was my father's car. The trunk was open. My brother Trayvon was standing by the front door. He was wearing a white linen suit that looked ridiculous in the afternoon heat. He was holding a power drill. I watched in frozen horror as he drilled into the lock of my front door. He was destroying the custom mahogany frame. He was laughing. My mother Bernadette stepped into the frame. She was holding a large garment bag. She pointed at the door. She shouted something at Trayvon. She looked impatient. She looked like she owned the place. My father Reginald was there too. He was directing a group of movers who were carrying crates of wine and flowers toward the back patio. They were setting up tables. They were draping white linens over my outdoor furniture. They were not robbing me. They were moving in. I zoomed in on the feed. I saw the banner they were unrolling near the garage. It was painted in gold and white script. The words made my blood run cold. It read, "The Trayvon and Bianca wedding, hosted at the family estate." The family estate. I felt a cold and sharp rage settle in my chest. It was a physical sensation, like swallowing ice. They had taken my $15,000. They had told me they needed it for a venue deposit. But they had not rented a venue. They had broken into my private sanctuary. They had destroyed my property, and they were planning to host a wedding in my house without even telling me. I looked at their faces on the small screen. They looked happy. They looked proud. They looked like people who had gotten away with the perfect crime. They thought I was in Dubai. They thought I was thousands of miles away. They thought I would never know. I tapped the shoulder of the driver. I told him to turn the car around. I told him I was not going to London. I was going to Atlanta. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. He saw the look on my face. He did not ask questions. He simply nodded and changed lanes. I looked back down at the phone. I watched Trayvon kick my front door open. I watched my mother walk inside my home with her muddy shoes. I watched my father high-five the movers. I did not call the police, not yet. That would be too easy. That would be too quick. They wanted to play house. They wanted to pretend they were royalty. They wanted to show off for the elite family of the bride. I would let them. I would let them set up the tables. I would let them invite the guests. I would let them think they had won. And then I would remind them who actually owned the building. I instructed the pilot to file a new flight plan immediately. My assistant looked terrified, but she knew better than to argue with me when I had that specific look in my eyes. Within an hour, I was strapped into a leather seat on the Emirates jet, screaming through the stratosphere toward Atlanta. The cabin was silent. It was a silence that cost $20,000, but right now it felt like a coffin. I stared out at the black void of the night sky. My reflection stared back at me. I saw a woman who had built a kingdom out of nothing. I saw a woman who commanded respect in boardrooms from Tokyo to New York, but to my family I was still just a resource to be mined. I reached for my phone. I needed to see it again. I needed to see the evidence of their audacity to keep my rage burning hot enough to fuel the journey home. I connected to the satellite internet. My fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a fury so cold it felt like ice in my veins. I opened Instagram. It was the first thing on my feed, a live stream notification from Trayvon. I tapped the screen. The video quality was crystal clear. They were standing on my pool deck. The infinity pool I had designed myself shimmered in the background. The water was a perfect turquoise blue. Trayvon was holding a glass of my vintage champagne. The bottle I had been saving for a special occasion sat open on the table behind him. His arm was around Bianca. She looked perfect. She looked polished. She looked completely fake. She was wearing a white bikini and a sheer cover-up that cost more than my first car. She waved at the camera with a manicured hand. She giggled. She said, "Welcome to the family estate." She said they were finally settling in for the wedding weekend. I read the caption. It made my stomach turn. The family retreat is finally ready. Legacy. Black excellence. I stared at the hashtag. Legacy. They were claiming my hard work as their inheritance. They were building a dynasty on a foundation of theft. They were using phrases meant to uplift our community to cover up a felony. I closed the app before I threw the phone across the cabin. I needed information. I needed to know exactly how deep the betrayal went. I scrolled to the only number in my family that I still trusted, Auntie May. She was the only one who had ever sent me a birthday card without asking for money inside. She answered on the first ring. Her voice was a hushed whisper. "Amara, where are you?" I told her I was in the air. I told her I saw the video. I asked her what was happening. There was a long pause, a pause heavy with guilt and the static of a transatlantic connection. She said, "Baby, they lied to you. The wedding is not next week. It is tomorrow." Tomorrow. The word hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the armrest of my seat. I asked why. Why would they lie? Why would they take $15,000 from me and then ensure I could not attend? Why would they break into my house and lock me out of the celebration? Auntie May started crying. I could hear her sniffling on the other end. She said it was Bianca. She said it was her mother. The Whitmans. They are very particular people, Amara. They are Jack and Jill. They are links. They care about image. They care about pedigree. I pressed her. I asked what that had to do with me. I am a CEO. I am wealthy. I have more money than the Whitmans could ever dream of liquidating. Auntie May sighed. She said, "They think you are too much. They think you are too loud, too aggressive." She lowered her voice even further. She said, "They think you are too dark, Amara. They said you do not fit the aesthetic. They said you look like you came from the struggle, and they want to present an image of old money. They said you would embarrass Trayvon in front of the banking elite. They want the money, Amara. They just do not want the source." I hung up the phone. I did not say goodbye. I sat there in the dim light of the cabin. I looked at my hands. They were the hands that had signed million-dollar contracts. They were the hands that had pulled my parents out of debt 3 times. And yet, I was too dark. I was too street. I was too much. They had taken my money. They had broken into my home. And they had erased me because I did not fit their paper bag test of acceptability. They wanted my resources, but they despised my existence. They wanted the fruit, but they hated the root. I did not cry. Crying was for people who had no power. Crying was for the girl they thought I was. I reached for the bottle of heavy red wine sitting on the table. It was a Cabernet that cost $400 a bottle. I poured a glass. I drank it in one long swallow. The wine burned my throat. It was a good burn. It felt like fuel. I picked up my secure phone. I dialed Elijah, my attorney. He answered instantly. His voice was thick with sleep but alert. I told him to wake up. I told him to open the vault. I told him to pull the deed to the Lake Lanier property. I told him to pull the foreclosure files on my parents' house. I told him to get the private investigators ready. He asked what the plan was. He asked if we were filing a lawsuit. I looked out at the clouds below me. I felt the vibration of the engines. I said, "No, Elijah, a lawsuit is too slow. Prepare the file. Prepare the evidence. We are going hunting." The wheels of the private jet touched down on the tarmac at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport with a violent screech that mirrored the chaos unfolding in my mind. It was 3 a.m. The humidity of Atlanta hung heavy in the air. It was a stark contrast to the dry and conditioned luxury of Dubai. I did not go to the baggage claim. I did not go to the taxi stand. My driver was already waiting on the tarmac. The car was a black armored SUV that looked more like a tank than a luxury vehicle. I climbed into the back seat. The leather was cool against my skin. I did not tell the driver to take me to Lake Lanier. I did not tell him to take me to my parents' house. I gave him a single address, one that belonged to a glass tower in Midtown. It was the headquarters of Elijah's law firm. Elijah was waiting for me in his corner office. The city lights of Atlanta twinkled below us. They were indifferent to the war that was brewing. Elijah looked tired. His tie was loosened, and his sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, but his eyes were sharp. He did not offer me coffee or sympathy. He pointed to a thick file sitting in the center of his mahogany desk. "You need to see this, Amara," Elijah said. His voice was grim. "It is worse than we thought." I sat down. I did not reach for the file immediately. I looked at the name on the cover, Trayvon Blackwell. It was a name that had haunted every major decision of my life. Seeing it printed there on a legal dossier brought a wave of nausea that I swallowed down with cold determination. The feeling of being second best washed over me. It was a familiar ghost. It pulled me back to a kitchen table 17 years ago. I was 18 years old. I was sitting at the chipped formica table in my parents' small kitchen. My hands were shaking as I held a thick envelope with a crimson crest. It was an acceptance letter from Harvard University. It was my ticket out. It was the proof that I was more than just the dark-skinned girl in the back of the class who worked too hard. My mother, Bernadette, stood at the stove. She was frying plantains. The smell of grease and sweet fruit filled the air. My father, Reginald, sat opposite me. He was reading the sports section of the newspaper. I told them I got in. I told them I had a partial scholarship. I told them I needed help with the rest. Reginald lowered the paper. He looked at me, not with pride, but with annoyance. He sighed. A long and weary sound that signaled I was being difficult. "We cannot afford Harvard, Amara," he said flatly. "You know this. But you have the college fund," I protested. "The one you saved for us." Bernadette turned from the stove. Her face was set in a hard line. "That money is for Trayvon," she said. "He got into that prep school in Buckhead, the one with the equestrian program. Trayvon, who had a C average. Trayvon, who had been suspended twice for fighting. But I got into Harvard," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "Trayvon is just going to high school. Why does he need the college fund now?" Bernadette wiped her hands on her apron. She walked over to me and placed a hand on my shoulder. It was heavy and suffocating. "Look at him, Amara," she said. She gestured to the living room where Trayvon was sprawled on the couch watching cartoons. He was light-skinned. He had green eyes and curly hair that the church ladies always cooed over. He was beautiful, and he knew it. "Trayvon has potential," Bernadette said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He has the look, Amara. He fits in with those people. He needs the right connections. He needs the pedigree. You." She paused, looking down at me with a mixture of pity and dismissal. "You are strong, Amara. You are a survivor. You can go to state school. You can work. You do not need the fancy degree to survive. But Trayvon, he is a king. We have to treat him like one. They took my future. They took the money that could have sent me to the Ivy League, and they spent it on a uniform with a crest for a boy who did not even want to be there." 6 months later, Trayvon was expelled for selling marijuana behind the gymnasium. The money was gone, wasted. And I was working double shifts at a diner to pay for my textbooks at the local state college. That was the dynamic. That was the rule. I was the mule. I was the one built for labor. I was the one who could take the hits. Trayvon was the show pony. He was the one who needed to be groomed and protected and displayed. They invested in his image. They spent my reality to buy his fantasy. I blinked. The memory faded. I was back in the high-rise office. I was 32 years old. I was a millionaire, and they were still doing it. I opened the file. The first document was a registration form for a limited liability company. It was filed 3 weeks ago. The name of the company was Legacy Growth Fund, LLC. The registered agent was Trayvon Blackwell. The registered address was my address, the address of the Lake Lanier estate. I looked at Elijah. He nodded. "He did not just break in to have a party, Amara," Elijah said. "He is running a Ponzi scheme from your living room." I flipped the page. There were marketing materials, glossy brochures printed on heavy cardstock. They featured photos of my house, my pool, my dock. The text was bold and confident. It promised exclusive investment opportunities in luxury real estate developments. It claimed that the Legacy Growth Fund had over $10 million in assets under management. It claimed that Trayvon Blackwell was a real estate mogul with a decade of experience. He is selling buy-ins, Elijah explained. He is targeting the Whitmans and their circle. He is selling packages of $50,000 each. He is telling them that he is developing the land adjacent to the estate. He is promising a 20% return in 6 months. I stared at the brochure. It was a lie, a massive and federal crime-level lie. He did not own the land. He did not have $10 million. He barely had $10. He is using the wedding as a sales pitch. I realized. My voice was cold. He is not just trying to impress them, he is trying to rob them. Exactly, Elijah said. He is using your house as the bait. He is showing them the lifestyle. He is letting them walk through the marble foyer and drink champagne by the infinity pool. He is letting them believe that this is his life, and once they believe it, they write the check. I looked at the list of potential investors. It was a who is who of the black elite in Atlanta. Doctors, lawyers, politicians, friends of Bianca parents, people who had worked their whole lives to build their wealth, people who trusted the Whitman name. If he takes their money, I said, if he takes $50,000 from these people and the fund collapses, you go down with him. Elijah finished the sentence. His name is on the LLC, but the address is yours. The asset he is flashing is yours. When the SEC comes knocking, they will come to your door. They will freeze your assets. They will investigate Onyx Holdings. He is not just stealing from strangers, Amara. He is building a bomb in your basement. I closed the file. The anger that had been simmering in my gut turned into something solid. It was no longer just about disrespect. It was no longer just about $15,000 or a wedding invitation. This was an existential threat. My parents and my brother were not just parasites. They were a cancer. They were willing to destroy everything I had built just to maintain the illusion of their own importance. They were willing to risk my freedom so Trayvon could play businessman for a weekend. Bernadette text echoed in my mind. This is about family honor. There was no honor here. There was only greed. There was only the desperate and pathetic need to be seen as something they were not. I stood up. I walked to the window. I looked out at the sprawling city of Atlanta. Somewhere out there in the dark, my family was sleeping in my beds. They were dreaming of the money they were going to steal tomorrow. They were dreaming of the applause they would receive. They thought I was the worker bee, the ugly duckling, the one who would always clean up the mess. Elijah stood up behind me. "What do you want to do, Amara?" he asked. "We can go to the police now. We have enough for an arrest." I shook my head. "No," I said. My reflection in the glass was hard. My eyes were dark. If we arrest him now, it is quiet. He spins a story. He tells Bianca I am the jealous sister trying to sabotage him. He plays the victim. He keeps his dignity. I turned around. I placed my hand on the thick file. "I want him to sell the packages," I said. "I want him to stand on that stage tomorrow. I want him to look those investors in the eye. I want him to sign the contracts. I want him to feel the money in his hands." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "You want him to commit the crime?" "I want him to hang himself," I corrected. "I want the Whitmans to see it. I want his investors to see it. I want my parents to see it. I want to destroy the myth of Trayvon Blackwell so thoroughly that he can never rise again." I looked at my watch. It was 4 a.m. "Get the helicopter ready, Elijah," I said. "And call the stylist. I need a dress. I need something gold. Something that screams money. Something that shines brighter than the bride." Elijah smiled. It was a sharp and dangerous smile. "It is going to be a bloodbath," he said. I picked up the file. "It is not a bloodbath, Elijah," I said, walking toward the door. "It is a correction." I left the armored SUV at the law firm. I could not pull up to the estate in a vehicle that screamed money and power. Not if I wanted to catch them in their lie. Not if I wanted to see exactly how they planned to treat the sister they thought was broke. I took a detour to a long-term parking garage where I kept my old college car. It was a dented Honda Accord with fading paint and a muffler that rattled like a can of loose change. It was the perfect camouflage. It was the car they expected me to drive. It was the car that fit their narrative of Amara, the struggling secretary. The drive to Lake Lanier usually took 40 minutes from the city. I made it in 30. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned the color of bleached bone. The closer I got to the water, the heavier the air felt. It was thick with humidity and the impending storm of my own making. I turned onto the private access road that led to my property. I had paved this road myself 6 months ago. I had paid for the smooth asphalt and the landscaping that lined the driveway. Now I was driving on it like a trespasser. The iron gates of the estate came into view. They were wide open. The electronic lock I had installed was visibly damaged. The keypad hung loose from its casing. A wire dangled like a severed limb. They had not just picked the lock, they had butchered it. But it was what hung above the gate that made me slam on the brakes. A massive vinyl banner was stretched between the stone pillars. It was at least 20 feet long. The background was a tacky gold foil that shimmered aggressively in the afternoon sun. The text was printed in a bold and swirling font that was trying too hard to be elegant. It read, Trayvon and Bianca, the union of dynasties. I stared at the word dynasties. My family did not have a dynasty. We had a history of bad credit and missed payments. We had a legacy of robbing Peter to pay Paul. Yet here they were claiming my hard work, my equity, my literal home, as the seat of their imaginary empire. I pressed the accelerator. The Honda groaned as I pulled through the gate and up the winding driveway. The house rose up before me. It was a modern masterpiece of glass and cedar that hugged the shoreline. I had designed every angle to capture the light. I had chosen every beam. Now it looked like a circus tent. White tents cluttered the manicured lawn. Tables were scattered everywhere. A catering van was parked on the grass. I saw staff moving back and forth carrying trays of silver and crystal. I parked the Honda right in the center of the driveway. I parked it next to my father's leased Mercedes and a line of luxury cars that I assumed belonged to the early arrivals from Bianca's family. The contrast was violent. My rusted sedan looked like a scar on the face of their perfection. I stepped out of the car. I was wearing jeans and a simple black t-shirt. I had tied my hair back. I wore no makeup. I looked tired. I looked like the person they needed me to be. The front door of the main house swung open before I could even take a step. Bernadette marched out. She did not walk. She stormed. My mother was wearing a dress that I recognized instantly. It was a silk Valentino caftan with a bold floral print. It cost $3,000. I knew the price because I had paid the credit card bill for it 2 months ago when she told me it was for a church fundraiser. She looked expensive. She looked frantic. She stopped at the top of the porch steps. Her eyes raked over me with a mixture of panic and disgust. She looked at my car. She looked at my shoes. She looked at my face. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. The sound was like steam escaping a pressure valve. She rushed down the steps. She waved her hands at me as if she were trying to shoo away a stray dog. "I told you next week," she said. Her voice was a harsh whisper. "I told you the wedding was next week. Why are you here now?" I leaned against the door of my car. I crossed my arms. "I decided to come early," I said. My voice was calm. It was the calm of a predator watching prey struggle in a net. "I wanted to surprise you. I wanted to help." "Help!" she scoffed. She looked around nervously, her eyes darting toward the main house where the catering staff was working. "Look at you, Amara. You cannot help. You look like a disaster." She stepped into my personal space. The smell of expensive perfume was overwhelming. It was a scent that did not belong to her. It belonged to the woman she was pretending to be. "You have to leave," she said. Her hands were shaking. "The Whitmans are coming. Bianca's parents. They are arriving in an hour for the rehearsal dinner. We cannot have you here. Not looking like this. Not driving this." She kicked the tire of my Honda. "This thing is an eyesore," she spat. "Move it. Get it off the driveway. Park it in the woods, or better yet, drive it back to Atlanta. You are going to ruin the aesthetic." The aesthetic. I looked at her. I looked at the mother who had raised me. She was not worried about my feelings. She was not happy to see her daughter. She was worried that my poverty would stain her performance. She was worried that the presence of her dark-skinned and working-class daughter would crack the veneer of old money she had plastered over our family. "You look dusty, Amara," she said. The insult was casual. Learned. "You look like you just came from the street. Bianca's mother is a member of the Lynx. Her father is a judge. These are refined people. They do not want to see." She gestured vaguely at my entire existence. "This." Before I could respond, the front door opened again. Reginald stepped out. My father. He was wearing a tuxedo. It was not a rental. It was a custom fit. I wondered which of my credit cards had bled for that purchase. He looked the part of the patriarch. He looked tall and proud and completely fraudulent. He saw me and his face hardened. He did not look surprised. He looked annoyed, like a CEO dealing with an incompetent intern. He walked down the steps. He did not hug me. He did not smile. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy ring of keys. He threw them at me. He did not hand them to me. He tossed them through the air. The metal struck my chest with a dull thud before falling into the dirt at my feet. "If you are going to be here, you are going to be useful," he barked. I looked down at the keys in the dirt. They were the spare keys to my own house, the ones I kept in the lockbox for emergencies. "Pick them up," he ordered. I slowly bent down. I picked up the keys. The metal was cool in my hand. "Those are for the service entrance around the back," he said. He pointed a manicured finger toward the side of the house. "The caterers are short-handed. They need someone to wash dishes and prep the vegetables. If you want to stay, you work." He adjusted his bow tie. He looked at the banner above the gate. He looked satisfied. "And Amara," he said. His voice dropped lower. It became a threat. "Listen to me very closely. Do not say a word to anyone. Do not open your mouth to the Whitmans. Do not talk to the guests." He took a step closer. He towered over me. "If anyone asks," he said, "this house is a gift. It is a wedding gift that your mother and I bought for Trayvon. We bought it for him to start his legacy. Do you understand? Do not embarrass us by claiming things you could never afford. You are here to help. You are not here to be family." He turned his back on me. He walked back up the stairs to stand beside my mother. They looked like a power couple. They looked like the lords of the manor. "Get the car out of sight," he called over his shoulder. "And use the back door. The front is for guests." I stood there in the driveway. The sun beat down on my neck. I held the dirty keys in my hand. I looked at the house I had bought with my own blood and sweat. I looked at the parents who were treating me like an indentured servant on my own land. I could have ended it right there. I could have pulled out the deed on my phone. I could have called the police. I could have screamed until the glass windows shattered. But then I remembered the file in Elijah's office. I remembered the Ponzi scheme. I remembered the investors my brother was planning to defraud. I remembered the fake documents he had created. I needed those documents. I needed physical proof. I needed to find where Trayvon had hidden the ledger and the fake contracts. If I kicked them out now, they would take the evidence with them. They would disappear and spin a story that I was the villain. I needed to be inside. I needed access. And they had just given it to me. I looked at Reginald. I looked at Bernadette. I forced my face into a mask of submission. I slumped my shoulders. I let them see the defeat they craved. "Okay, Dad," I said quietly. "I will move the car. I will help in the kitchen." Reginald nodded. He did not say thank you. He just turned and walked inside. Bernadette gave me one last critical look. "Try to fix your hair," she said. "You look wild." She followed him inside. The heavy door closed. I stood alone in the driveway. I gripped the keys until they bit into my palm. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had put me in my place. They thought I was the help. I walked back to my car. I moved it to the service road behind the garage. I walked to the back door. I slid the key into the lock. I was not entering as a daughter. I was not entering as a sister. I was entering as a spy. I was a Trojan horse in a black t-shirt. I opened the door and stepped into the cool shadows of the kitchen. Let the games begin. The sun had dipped below the tree line. The sky was a bruised purple over Lake Lanier. My estate was transformed into a playground for the black elite of Atlanta. The rehearsal dinner was in full swing. White linen tables dotted the lawn. Crystal stemware caught the flickering light of 100 floating candles in the pool. A jazz quartet played soft and inoffensive music in the corner. The air smelled of roasted lamb and ambition. I was not seated at the head table. I was not seated with the cousins or even the distant friends. I was seated behind a large decorative hedge near the service entrance. It was a round plastic folding table covered with a cheap polyester cloth. My dinner companions were the wedding photographer, the videographer, and the backup saxophone player. We were the help. We were the invisible machinery that made the fantasy possible. The photographer looked at me. He was a young man with tired eyes. He pointed his plastic fork at my plate of cold lasagna. It was the staff meal. It was not the rack of lamb the guests were eating. "You look like you own the place," he joked. "The way you walk. You have a strut." I took a sip of lukewarm water from a plastic cup. "I do," I said simply. "I own everything you see." He laughed. He thought I was making a joke. He went back to eating his cold pasta. He did not know that he was sitting next to a woman who could buy his entire studio with the change in her purse. I watched through the gaps in the hedge. My mother Bernadette was holding court at the center table. She was laughing too loudly. She touched the arm of Mrs. Whitman, the mother of the bride. Mrs. Whitman was a woman who wore pearls like armor. She looked at my mother with a thin and polite smile. It was the kind of smile a shark gives a seal before the bite. My father Reginald was pouring wine for Judge Whitman. "Bianca, father." The judge looked bored. He looked like a man who was used to people begging him for favors. My father looked desperate. He was sweating despite the cool evening breeze. He was talking fast, probably pitching the fake investment fund. Then I saw them. Trayvon and Bianca detached themselves from the crowd. They walked toward the edge of the patio. They were heading for the secluded alcove near the kitchen exhaust. It was a spot designed for privacy, a spot where lovers could steal a kiss. But they were not there to kiss. I leaned back in my chair. The hedge provided perfect cover. I was less than 5 feet away from them. I could smell the expensive cigar smoke clinging to Trayvon's jacket. I could smell the cloying sweetness of Bianca perfume. I held my breath. I became a statue. Bianca looked agitated. She was not the blushing bride. She was a woman watching a business deal go sideways. She grabbed Trayvon's arm. Her nails dug into the white fabric of his suit. "Trayvon," she hissed. Her voice was low and urgent. "My father is asking questions. He wants to see the deed. He says he cannot wire the $2 million for the Legacy Growth Fund until he verifies the collateral. $2 million. My eyes widened. The file in Elijah's office had said $50,000 buy-ins, but Trayvon was swinging for the fences. He was trying to extract $2 million from his new father-in-law. He was using my house as the bait for a whale. Trayvon laughed. It was a dismissive sound. He took a drag from his cigar. He blew the smoke into the night air. "Tell the judge to relax," Trayvon said. His voice was smooth, arrogant. "The paperwork is being processed. You know how these county clerks are. They are slow. He is not going to wait forever, Trayvon." Bianca snapped. "He wants to see the title in your name. Right now the public record still shows that shell company. Onyx something. He is getting suspicious. He thinks you are leveraging assets you do not control. Control." Trayvon chuckled. He reached out and touched Bianca's cheek. She flinched away. "Babe, listen to me," he said. His tone shifted. It became colder, more menacing. It was the voice of the bully I remembered from childhood. "Mom and Dad are handling the Amara situation. She is a non-factor. See." "But she is here," Bianca whispered. "I saw her in the driveway. She looked angry. What if she talks? What if she tells my dad the truth? She will not say a word." Trayvon promised. He leaned in close to her. I could see the glint of the diamond stud in his ear. "Amara is weak. She has always been weak. She is just a name on a piece of paper. A placeholder. This house. This land. It belongs to the Blackwell family. It belongs to me. Mom and Dad made sure of that." "What do you mean?" Bianca asked. Trayvon smiled. It was a smile that made my blood freeze. "We are not just borrowing the keys, Bianca," he said. "We are fixing the glitch. Dad has a lawyer drawing up the papers right now. Competency papers." I froze. My heart stopped beating for a second. Competency papers. "We are going to have her declared unstable," Trayvon continued. His voice was casual, like he was discussing the weather. "We have the history, the depression in college, the isolation. We are going to say she is having a breakdown, that she is unfit to manage her assets. Dad will be granted power of attorney. Conservatorship. Once that is signed, the house is ours, the accounts are ours, Onyx Holdings is ours." He took another drag of the cigar. "We are going to kick her out on Monday morning. We will put her in a nice facility for a while, somewhere quiet. By the time she gets out, if she gets out, the title will be transferred, the money will be in our accounts, and you and I will be in Paris." Bianca was silent for a moment. I waited for her to be horrified. I waited for her to say that this was evil, that this was a crime. Instead, she smoothed the front of her silk dress. She looked at Trayvon with a calculating gaze. "Are you sure it will hold up in court?" she asked. "Mom says she will testify," Trayvon said. "She will say Amara has been hearing voices, that she has been erratic. Who are they going to believe? The respected church mother or the single recluse daughter who never comes home?" Bianca nodded slowly. A small smile touched her lips. "Okay," she said. "As long as the deed is ready by Monday. My dad needs that security. $2 million, Trayvon. Do not mess this up. I got this," he said. He kissed her forehead. "Now fix your face. We have guests to impress." They walked back toward the party. They slipped back into the light and the music. They left me sitting in the dark behind the hedge. I stared at the plastic plate of cold lasagna. My hands were perfectly still. They were not just planning to steal my money. They were planning to steal my life. They were planning to use the legal system to strip me of my agency, to lock me away, to paint me as crazy so they could loot my empire. They were going to use my own history against me, the depression I suffered when they cut me off in college, the isolation I chose to build my business. They were going to weaponize my survival to fund their greed. I looked at the photographer next to me. He was scrolling on his phone, oblivious. I stood up. I picked up the plastic plate. I walked over to the garbage can and scrapped the food into the bin. The time for observation was over. The time for mercy was dead. Trayvon wanted to talk about competency. He wanted to talk about power. I walked toward the back door of the house. I needed to make a call. I needed Elijah. They wanted to declare war on my mind. I was about to drop a nuclear bomb on their reality. I slipped out of the kitchen while the catering staff was busy plating the salad course. The noise of the party drifted through the open windows. It was a cacophony of laughter and clinking glasses that masked the sound of my footsteps on the hardwood floor. I moved through the shadows of my own home like a thief. I knew every creak of the floorboards. I knew every angle of the hallway. I made my way toward the east wing of the house. This was where I had built my office. It was supposed to be a sanctuary of glass and light where I managed the Onyx Holdings empire. I reached the heavy oak door. It was closed. I tried the handle. It was locked. I was not surprised. Trayvon would want to protect his lair. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small tension wrench and a pick. I had learned how to pick locks during my first year in real estate when tenants would vanish with the keys. It took me less than 10 seconds. The tumbler clicked. The door swung open. The smell hit me first. It was a nauseating mixture of stale cigar smoke and cognac. I stepped inside and closed the door softly behind me. I did not turn on the main light. The moonlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows provided enough illumination. My beautiful minimalist office had been desecrated. My ergonomic chair was pushed into a corner. In its place sat a massive tufted leather throne that looked like it belonged in a bad mob movie. The sleek glass desk was covered in ash and empty tumblers, but I was not here to critique the interior design. I was here for the paper trail. I walked to the desk. I pulled open the top drawer. It was empty except for a box of cigars. I tried the second drawer. Nothing but a lighter and a cutter. I moved to the bottom drawer. It was locked. I picked it again. My hands were steady. My rage had turned into a cold precision. Inside the drawer sat a single thick black folder. There was no label on the front. I pulled it out and laid it on the desk. I opened it. The first page was a promissory note. It was not from a bank. It was not from a reputable lending institution. The letterhead read, Kingston Private Capital. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew that name. Everyone in the Atlanta business world knew that name. Kingston was not a banker. He was a loan shark in a bespoke suit. He lent money to desperate people who had been rejected by every legitimate institution. His interest rates were criminal. His collection methods were violent. I scanned the terms. The principal amount was $500,000. The interest rate was 25% compounding weekly. The borrower was listed as Trayvon Blackwell. $500,000. This was not just for the wedding. This was massive. This was life or death money. I flipped the page to the collateral section. My breath hitched in my throat. The collateral listed was the property at 1224 Lakeview Drive. My house, my estate. I stared at the signature line at the bottom of the page. It was signed in blue ink. Amara Blackwell. It was a forgery. It was a clumsy attempt to copy the signature I used on my holiday cards. But it was not just Trayvon who had signed. There were 2 witness signatures below it. One belonged to Reginald Blackwell. The other belonged to Bernadette Blackwell. My parents had witnessed the forgery. They had watched my brother sign my name to a death warrant, and they had signed their names right next to his. I flipped to the next document in the file. It was a rider to the loan agreement. It was a document that outlined the transfer of deed in the event of a default. The date of default was listed as the Monday following the wedding. If Trayvon did not pay back the $500,000 plus interest by Monday morning, Kingston would take the title to the house. I understood the plan instantly. It was terrifying in its simplicity. Trayvon was gambling everything on the Whitman investment. He needed the $2 million from Bianca's father to pay back Kingston. He was using my house as the bridge loan. He was using my assets to float his Ponzi scheme until he could secure the bigger bag. But what if the Whitmans did not pay? What if the judge did his due diligence and realized the fund was a scam? What if the money did not come through? I looked at the fine print. There was a personal guarantee clause. It stated that if the collateral was insufficient, the guarantor accepted full personal liability for the debt. The guarantor was listed as Amara Blackwell. They had stolen my identity. They had created a fake profile. They had linked my Social Security number to this loan. If the deal fell through, Kingston would not just come for the house. He would come for me. He would come for my bank accounts. He would come for my assets. And if I refused to pay, he would send men with baseball bats to my front door. My family had not just betrayed me. They had sold me. They had traded my safety for a weekend of luxury. They had placed me directly in the path of a violent predator to save their golden child. I looked at a handwritten note clipped to the back of the file. It was in my father's handwriting. It read, "Do not worry about Amara. Once the competency hearing goes through on Monday, we will have control of her accounts. We can pay Kingston from her personal savings if the Whitman deal is delayed." I felt the room spin. They had a contingency plan. If the fraud failed, they were going to pay off the loan shark with my own money after they had me committed. They were going to lock me away in a facility and drain my accounts to pay for their crimes. They were not just bad family members. They were monsters. They were willing to erase my entire existence. They were willing to dismantle my mind and my legacy just to keep Trayvon afloat. I closed the folder. My hands were shaking now. Not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of the revelation. I had thought this was about disrespect. I had thought this was about a wedding invitation. This was a hit. This was an assassination attempt on my life and my freedom. I took out my phone. I photographed every single page of the file. I made sure the signatures were clear. I made sure the terms were visible. I made sure the dates were legible. I put the folder back in the drawer. I locked it. I stood up and looked around the room. The smell of cigars was suddenly suffocating. I walked to the window and looked out at the lawn. I could see my father laughing with a group of investors. I could see my mother dancing near the stage. I could see Trayvon whispering in Bianca's ear. They looked so happy. They looked so secure. They thought they had covered every angle. They thought I was the weak link. They had no idea that I was the one holding the match. I turned away from the window. I had seen enough. I had the evidence. I had the motive. I had the weapon. It was time to meet the shark. If Kingston wanted his money, he was going to have to get it from me. But he was not going to get it by taking my house. He was going to get it by taking my brother down. I walked out of the office and locked the door. I moved through the hallway with a new purpose. The spy mission was over. It was time for the execution. I drove the rattling Honda away from the estate and onto the highway. The noise of the party faded behind me, but the rage inside the car was deafening. I did not drive aimlessly. I drove with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. I had the address from the file I found in Trayvon's desk. Kingston Private Capital. It was located in a nondescript office park in Buckhead, the kind of building that was designed to be invisible. It had tinted windows and no signage. It was a fortress for money that did not like to be tracked. I parked the car and walked to the entrance. It was 11 at night. The building should have been closed, but sharks do not sleep. I pressed the intercom button. A camera buzzed as it focused on my face. "I am here to discuss the Blackwell account," I said into the speaker. My voice was calm. There was a pause. Then a heavy click. The door unlocked. I took the elevator to the top floor. The doors opened into a reception area that looked more like a modern art museum than a loan office. The walls were bare concrete. The floor was polished black stone. The air was frigid. It was set to a temperature that kept people alert and uncomfortable. Kingston was waiting for me in his office. He sat behind a desk made of a single slab of raw granite. He was a large man. He had skin the color of deep mahogany and wore a suit that cost more than the Honda I had just parked. He was not alone. 2 men in dark suits stood in the corners of the room. They were not accountants. They were muscle. Kingston did not stand up. He did not offer me a seat. He looked at me with eyes that were flat and dead. "You are not Trayvon," he said. His voice was a deep rumble. "And you are late on the interest payment." I walked to the chair opposite his desk and sat down without an invitation. I crossed my legs and placed my purse on the granite. "I am not Trayvon," I said. "I am Amara Blackwell, the woman who actually owns the house you think you hold as collateral." Kingston went still. He looked at me. Then he looked at the file open on his desk. He picked up a pen and tapped it against the stone. "You are the sister," he stated. "The one who signed the guarantor agreement." I reached into my purse and pulled out my driver's license. I slid it across the desk. It spun on the smooth surface and stopped right in front of him. "Look at the signature," I said. Kingston looked at the card, then he looked at the loan document. The difference was obvious. The signature on his contract was a shaky loop. My actual signature was sharp and angular. He leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked. His expression did not change, but the air in the room shifted. It became dangerous. "So Trayvon lied," Kingston said softly. "He committed fraud. He forged a deed. He forged a signature." "He did," I confirmed. "And that puts you in a difficult position, Mr. Kingston. You are holding a bad note. The collateral is worthless because he does not own the asset. If you try to foreclose on my house, I will sue you for predatory lending and fraud. I will tie this up in court for 5 years. You will spend more on lawyers than the loan is worth." Kingston narrowed his eyes. "I could just break his legs," he said. "Or yours." "You could." I agreed. My pulse did not jump. I had dealt with corporate raiders who destroyed lives for sport. Physical threats were just a crude form of negotiation. But that will not get you your money. Trayvon has nothing. He is a fraud. He has no assets, no job, no money. If you hurt him, you just have a hospital bill and a police investigation. You still have a $500,000 hole in your ledger. I paused. I let the reality of his loss sink in. "But," I said, "I have a solution." Kingston raised an eyebrow. "I am listening." I opened my banking app on my phone. I turned the screen so he could see the balance. It was an account I used for liquid acquisitions. It held 7 figures. "I will buy the debt," I said. Kingston looked at the phone. Then he looked at me with a new level of respect. "You want to pay your brother's debt?" he asked. "You want to save him?" I laughed. It was a cold sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "No," I said. "I do not want to save him. I want to own him." I leaned forward. My eyes locked with his. "You know the papers Trayvon gave you are false. You cannot foreclose on my house because the law is on my side. But I have a more attractive offer. I will pay you $300,000. Cash. Tonight." Kingston scoffed. "The principal is $500,000. Plus interest." "The principal is gone," I countered. "You lent money to a ghost. You can take $300,000 right now and clear the books. Or you can chase a broke man for the rest of your life and get zero. 300,000 is better than zero. It is a business decision." Kingston stared at me. He was calculating. He was assessing the risk. He knew I was right. Trayvon was a dead end. A lawsuit would expose his operation. He picked up the pen again. He tapped it 3 times. $350,000, he said. "And you take the file. You take the original note. You take the problem." "Done," I said. I wired the money from my phone. It took 2 minutes. The notification chimed. Transfer complete. Kingston opened his drawer. He pulled out the original promissory note, the one with the forged signatures of my parents and my brother. He slid it across the granite slab. "It is a pleasure doing business with you, Ms. Blackwell," he said. He did not smile, but there was a gleam in his eye. "You are colder than he is." I picked up the file. It felt heavy in my hand. It was not just paper. It was a weapon. It was the chain that would bind Trayvon to me for the rest of his life. I stood up. I smoothed my jeans. "I am not cold, Mr. Kingston," I said. "I am just a woman who pays her debts. And now, my brother is going to pay his." I walked out of the office. The door locked behind me with a heavy metallic thud. I stepped into the night air. I held the file against my chest. I was no longer the little sister. I was no longer the victim. I was the bank, and the bank was about to call in the loan. I returned to the executive conference room at the law firm just as the sun began to bleed over the Atlanta skyline. It was Saturday morning, the day of the wedding, the day of the reckoning. My body hummed with a strange and electric energy. I had not slept in 24 hours, but I did not feel fatigue. I felt sharp. I felt dangerous. Elijah was already there. He had assembled the team I requested. 3 men in black tactical gear stood by the window. They were not mall cops. They were private contractors, former military, men who did not flinch when things got loud. Sitting at the head of the table was a young man with a laptop and a mess of cables. This was Tyrell, the best forensic data specialist in the city. I threw the black folder I had taken from Kingston onto the table. It landed with a heavy slap. "We have the smoking gun," I said. My voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a gavel strike. Trayvon has mortgaged a property he does not own to a man who breaks kneecaps for a living, and he forged my signature to do it. Elijah picked up the file. He scanned the documents. His eyes widened. "This is a felony, Amara. Multiple felonies. We can have the police at the estate in an hour. We can shut this whole thing down before the first bottle of champagne is popped." I walked to the coffee machine. I poured a cup of black espresso. I took a slow sip. "No," I said. Elijah looked at me. Confusion clouded his face. "No. Amara, this is dangerous. Kingston is involved. The fraud is massive. If we let the wedding start, you are exposing yourself to liability." I turned around. I leaned against the counter. "If we stop it now, Elijah," I said, "then Trayvon is just a victim of a misunderstanding. He will tell Bianca that I am a jealous sister. He will tell the Whitmans that it was a clerical error. He will spin the narrative. He will survive." I took another sip of coffee. "I do not want him to survive. I want him to be incinerated." I looked at the security team. "I want you at the estate by noon. Stay out of sight. Park the extraction vehicles on the service road. When I give the signal, I want you to secure the perimeter. No one leaves until the police arrive." Then I turned to Tyrell. "You have access to the estate network," I stated. It was not a question. I had installed the smart system myself. I knew the back doors. Tyrell nodded. "I am in. I have control over the lighting, the sound system, And the projection screens. Good, I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out a flash drive. It was a small piece of silver metal. It contained the photos of the foreclosure notices, the recording of my mother calling the Whitmans stuck-up snobs, the forged loan documents, and the deed to the house with my name on it. They have a slideshow prepared for the reception, I said. It is titled The Love Story. It is set to play right before the toasts. It is supposed to show photos of Trayvon and Bianca growing up. Tyrell took the drive. He plugged it into his laptop. I want you to replace that file, I commanded. Delete the love story. Upload this instead. Call it The Criminal Record. Tyrell typed a few commands. He looked up and grinned. Consider it done. When they hit play, they are going to get a very different kind of movie. Elijah sat back in his chair. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and admiration. You are going to let them host the event, he said. You are going to let them invite the judge, the politicians, the doctors. I nodded. I want the audience, Elijah. I want the biggest crowd possible. I want Judge Whitman to be standing right there when his son-in-law is exposed as a fraud. I want the Atlanta elite to see my parents for the parasites they are. The bigger the crowd, the harder the fall. I want the humiliation to be absolute. Elijah closed the folder. You are terrifying, Amara. I am just efficient, I replied. There was one last detail, the most important visual element of the night. I had spent years being the invisible daughter, the one in the background, the one in the sensible shoes and the gray suits. My mother had called me dusty. She had told me I would ruin the aesthetic. Tonight I was going to be the aesthetic. I had called my personal shopper in Paris 2 hours ago. She had pulled strings. She had woken up a courier. The package had arrived at the private airfield just 30 minutes ago. A stylist walked into the room pushing a rolling rack. On it hung a garment bag stamped with the logo of a French couture house. I unzipped the bag. The fabric inside seemed to catch the morning light and amplify it. It was a gown made of liquid gold mesh. It was hand-beaded with thousands of topography crystals. It was structured and architectural. It had a plunging neckline and a train that pooled on the floor like melted bullion. It cost $20,000. It cost more than the catering. It cost more than Bianca dress. It cost more than Trayvon had ever earned in his life. I ran my hand over the cold metal fabric. This is not a dress, I whispered. This is war paint. I looked at Elijah. Get the helicopter ready, I said. We are not driving through the front gate. We are not parking in the service lot. I paused. A smile touched my lips. It was not a nice smile. I am going to land on the lawn. I am going to blow their napkins off the tables. I am going to ruin their hair. And then I am going to take back what is mine. The plan was set. The trap was baited. The players were in position. I picked up the gold dress. It was heavy. It felt like armor. It is time to get dressed, Elijah, I said. The show starts at sunset, and I do not intend to be late. The sun dipped below the horizon of Lake Lanier, painting the sky in hues of violet and bruised orange. The reception was a masterpiece of deception. My estate had been transformed into a playground for the elite. 500 guests sat at round tables draped in heavy white linen. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted duck. Trayvon stood at the head table. He held a flute of champagne in one hand and a microphone in the other. He looked every inch the young tycoon. He was laughing at something Judge Whitman said. He leaned in close to his new father-in-law. I could practically hear the lies dripping from his lips. He was probably telling the judge that the boathouse was being renovated to make room for a new yacht. He was probably securing that $2 million investment right now. My parents, Reginald and Bernadette, sat nearby. They were beaming. Bernadette wore a silver gown that shimmered under the string lights. She looked like a queen surveying her kingdom. She pointed to the main house and gestured expansively to a group of women from the links. She was selling the fantasy. She was telling them how hard she had worked to give her children this legacy. It was perfect. It was beautiful. It was a lie. Then the vibration started. It began as a low thrumming in the chest, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to come from the water itself. The guests stopped talking. They looked around in confusion. The surface of the infinity pool began to ripple. The water danced nervously against the tile. The sound grew louder. It shifted from a vibration to a roar, a deep mechanical chopping noise that drowned out the jazz band. The string lights began to sway violently. Reginald looked up. He shielded his eyes against the fading light. He looked annoyed. He probably thought it was a news chopper or a medical transport flying too low. But it did not pass over. It got closer. The wind hit the lawn first. It was a sudden and violent gust. The white linen napkins flew off the tables like a flock of startled birds. Crystal glasses toppled over and shattered against the stone patio. The expensive floral centerpieces were ripped from their vases and sent tumbling across the grass. Women screamed and clutched their hats. Men grabbed the tables to steady them. A massive shadow fell over the party. A sleek black helicopter banked sharply over the water. It was a military-grade machine. It looked like a predator descending on a flock of sheep. The pilot maneuvered the craft with terrifying precision. He did not aim for the helipad. He aimed for the center of the lawn, the space that had been cleared for the dance floor. The roar was deafening now. The rotor wash flattened the grass. It whipped the guests' hair into their faces. It sent chairs skidding across the pavement. Trayvon dropped his microphone. It hit the floor with a screech of feedback that was lost under the sound of the engine. The helicopter touched down. The landing gear sank slightly into the soft turf. The engine whined as it powered down, but the blades continued to spin slowly. They sliced through the air with a menacing whoosh. The door of the helicopter slid open. The crowd stared in stunned silence. They expected a celebrity. They expected a politician. They expected someone who belonged in this world of power and excess. I stepped out. I was not wearing the jeans and t-shirt my mother had sneered at yesterday. I was not wearing the gray suit of a secretary. I was wearing war paint. The gold dress caught the floodlights from the house and ignited. It was a column of liquid metal that clung to my body and pooled around my feet. The crystals embedded in the mesh sparked like diamonds. It had a plunging neckline that was daring and aggressive. It was a dress that said, "I did not need permission." I adjusted my dark sunglasses. It was dusk, but I needed them to hide the cold lack of mercy in my eyes. Elijah stepped out behind me. He looked impeccable in a black suit. He carried a leather briefcase. Behind him came 4 private security contractors. They were large men. They wore tactical earpieces and expressions of stone. We walked toward the head table. My heels sank into the grass, but I did not stumble. I walked with the stride of a woman who owned the ground beneath her feet. The guests parted for me. They stared with open mouths. They whispered. They recognized the power even if they did not recognize the face. I saw the moment my family saw me. Reginald dropped his wine glass. It shattered on the patio. His face went gray. Bernadette stood up. Her hand flew to her throat. She looked at me with a mixture of horror and disbelief. She looked like she was seeing a ghost draped in $20,000 of gold. But it was Bianca who reacted first. The bride, the princess, the woman who had sneered at my existence. She stood on the riser of the head table. Her white dress was stained with spilled wine. Her hair was a mess from the wind. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "Who is that?" She screamed. Her voice was shrill and hysterical. "Who is ruining my wedding? Security! Get them out!" I did not stop walking. I did not look at her. I kept my eyes locked on Trayvon. My mother stumbled forward. She pushed past a waiter. She ran toward me. Her face was twisted in panic. "Amara," she gasped. The name was a strangled cry. "What are you doing? You cannot be here. Look at you. Khan, what the hell are you doing?" I stopped 10 feet away from them. I took off my sunglasses. I looked at my mother. I looked at my father. I looked at my brother. I smiled. It was sharp. It was cold. "I am crashing the party," I said. I ascended the stairs to the stage with the rhythmic precision of a ticking clock. The metal of my gold dress chimed softly against the wooden risers. It was a sound of impending war. The master of ceremonies was a local radio personality my parents had hired to add a veneer of celebrity to the evening. He looked at me with confusion. He looked at my security detail flanking the stage. He looked at the terrified expression on my brother's face. He made the smart choice. He stepped back and offered me the microphone without a word. I took the device. It felt cold and heavy in my hand. I turned to face the crowd. 500 faces stared back at me. They were the elite of Atlanta, the doctors, the lawyers, the politicians, the members of the Bull and the Lynx. They were the people my parents had spent a lifetime trying to impress, and they were all looking at me. The silence was absolute. The wind off the lake had died down, leaving a heavy and suffocating stillness. "Welcome to my home," I said. My voice boomed through the array of speakers. It was calm. It was steady. It was the voice I used when I fired an executive or closed a hostile takeover. I looked down at Trayvon. He was shaking his head. His mouth was forming the word "no" over and over again, but no sound came out. "I am so glad you could all make it to the Blackwell estate," I continued. "It is a beautiful property. I should know. I paid for every single brick." A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd like a wind. "However," I said, my voice hardening, "there seems to be a misunderstanding regarding the hosting of this event. You see, this party has not been paid for." I raised my left hand. It was the signal Tyrell had been waiting for in the tech booth. Behind me, the massive LED screen flickered. The image of the entwined initials T and B vanished. The screen went black for a heartbeat. Then it exploded with a light. The first image appeared in high-definition resolution. It was 20 feet high. It was undeniable. It was the warranty deed for the property at 1224 Lakeview Drive. The text was crisp. The county seal was visible, and there in the center of the document was the name of the grantee, Amara Blackwell, CEO, Onyx Holdings. I turned slightly to look at the screen. Then I looked back at the audience. "My brother told you this was a family estate," I said. "He told you it was his legacy, but as you can see, the ink on the deed is barely 6 months old, and his name is nowhere to be found. This is not a family home. This is a private asset of Onyx Holdings, and you are all currently trespassing on corporate property." The whispers grew louder. Judge Whitman stood up in the front row. He put on his glasses. He stared at the screen. He looked at the date. He looked at the signature. He looked at Marcus. My father shrank into his chair. "But we are just getting started," I said. I signaled again. The screen changed. This time it displayed a document that was much uglier. It was the promissory note from Kingston Private Capital. The terms were predatory. The interest rate was criminal. And at the bottom were the forged signatures of my parents and my brother. Next to it was the transfer of debt agreement I had signed only hours ago. Trayvon Blackwell needed money to fund this charade. I explained. He needed it so badly he borrowed $500,000 from a hard money lender who charges 25% weekly interest. He forged my signature to use my house as collateral. I paused. I let the words sink in. $500,000. Forgery. Predatory lending, but Mr. Kingston is a businessman. I continued, and so am I. As of last night, I purchased this debt. I am no longer just the sister of the groom. I am his creditor, and I am calling the loan due immediately. Trayvon let out a strangled cry. He lunged toward the stage. His face was twisted into a mask of pure animal panic. He scrambled up the first 2 steps. He reached for me. He wanted to silence me. He wanted to break the screen. He wanted to stop the truth from bleeding out. He never made it. One of the private security contractors stepped forward. He moved with the speed of a striking cobra. He caught Trayvon by the throat and slammed him backward onto the grass. It was a violent and efficient movement. Trayvon gasped for air. He clutched his neck. He looked up at me with eyes full of betrayal, but I felt nothing. "I have one last thing to share," I said, my voice cutting through the gasp of the crowd. I looked at Bianca. She was standing by the table. Her face was pale. She looked horrified. She looked like a victim. But I knew better. I knew she was complicit. I knew she was just as hungry for status as my brother. "My family has spent a lot of time trying to impress the Whitmans," I said. "But behind closed doors, their respect looks very different." The screen changed for the final time. It was a series of screenshots. They were from the Blackwell family group chat, the one they thought was private, the one they had excluded me from until I hacked my mother's cloud account. The messages were magnified. They were impossible to miss. The first message was from Bernadette. It read, I cannot believe we have to invite those bougie posers. Mrs. Whitman thinks she is so special because she is in the links. She is just a glorified housewife with a checkbook. We will bleed them dry once the wedding is over." The second message was from Reginald. It read, "The judge is an idiot. He will sign anything if you flatter his ego. Get the $2 million, Trayvon. Then we can drop the act." The third message was from Trayvon. It read, "Bianca is desperate. She knows her clock is ticking. She will believe whatever I tell her. Once I get access to the trust fund, I am buying a Ferrari." The silence in the ballroom was shattered. It was the sound of a reputation dying. Mrs. Whitman stood up. Her face was a mask of cold fury. She looked at Bernadette. She looked at the woman she had welcomed into her circle. "You called me a poser," Mrs. Whitman hissed. Her voice carried over the lawn. "You called my daughter desperate." Bernadette stood up. She reached out a hand. Her bracelets jangled. "Martha, please, it is a fake. She hacked it. It is not real. Do not touch me." Mrs. Whitman screamed. She recoiled as if my mother were contagious. "You are trash. You are gutter trash." Judge Whitman turned to my father. His face was red. His veins were bulging. "You tried to defraud me," he roared. "You tried to steal my daughter's inheritance." He looked at Trayvon, who was still gasping on the grass. "The wedding is off," the judge announced. His voice was a gavel strike. "There will be no union. There will be no money. There will be no legacy." He turned to his wife and daughter. "Get in the car," he ordered. "We are leaving." Bianca looked at Trayvon. She looked at the screen where his words about her desperation were still glowing in 10-foot letters. She looked at me standing on the stage in my gold armor. She ripped the diamond ring from her finger. She threw it at Trayvon. It hit him in the chest and bounced into the grass. "I hate you," she screamed. She ran after her parents. The guests began to scatter. They grabbed their purses. They abandoned their half-eaten meals. They fled the scene of the social murder. I stood on the stage. The spotlight was still on me. I looked down at my family. They were alone in the wreckage of their own ambition. The party was over. But the consequences were just beginning. The screams of the Whitmans were still echoing when I raised my hand. It was a simple gesture, a sharp downward motion. But it summoned the storm. From the service road behind the estate, the night exploded with sound. Sirens wailed. They were not the polite chirps of a traffic stop. They were the aggressive and relentless howls of a raid. Blue and red lights washed over the white tents. They turned the wedding reception into a crime scene. The guests froze. The waiters dropped their trays. A fleet of unmarked SUVs tore across the manicured lawn. They decimated the flower beds my mother had spent thousands of dollars arranging. Men and women in navy blue windbreakers swarmed out of the vehicles. On their backs, in bold yellow letters, was the acronym GBI, Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Elijah had been busy. He had not just prepared a civil lawsuit. He had sent the prospectus for the Legacy Growth Fund to the State Financial Crimes Division at 9 in the morning. Selling unregistered securities was a felony. Soliciting investment for a property you did not own was fraud. Doing it across state lines with wire transfers was a federal offense. Trayvon was still on the ground where my security contractor had pinned him. He tried to scramble away. He looked like a crab scuttling in the dirt. But there was nowhere to go. 2 agents hauled him to his feet. They did not treat him like a golden child. They treated him like a suspect. They slammed him against the hood of an SUV. "Trayvon Blackwell." An agent shouted, "You are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft." Trayvon sobbed. It was a high and keen sound. It was the sound of a man who had never faced a consequence in 35 years. He looked at me. His eyes were wide with terror. "Amara," he pleaded. "Amara, tell them. Tell them it was a mistake. I am your brother." I did not answer. I watched as the metal cuffs bit into his wrists. The golden watch he had bought with stolen money clinked against the steel. Reginald tried to run. It was a pathetic attempt. He stumbled toward the buffet table, but the agents were faster. They intercepted him before he could reach the shrimp cocktail. "Get your hands off me," Reginald bellowed. "I am a respected businessman. I demand to speak to my lawyer." "You are an accomplice, Mr. Blackwell," an agent said calmly. "You are listed as a partner in the Legacy Growth Fund. You signed the documents. You are coming with us." They spun him around. The tuxedo jacket strained as they pulled his arms back. The patriarch of the Blackwell dynasty was reduced to a prisoner in seconds. Bernadette stood alone. She was shaking. She looked from her husband to her son. She realized she was the only one left standing. But her freedom was temporary. Her reputation was already in handcuffs. Then there was Bianca, the bride, the princess. She watched Trayvon being shoved into the back of a police vehicle. Her face went through a rapid transformation. The shock faded. The fear faded. What remained was cold preservation. She looked down at her left hand. The diamond ring on her finger was massive. It was likely bought with the deposit money I had sent. She ripped it off. She did not hesitate. She walked over to the police car where the window was rolled down. She threw the ring at Trayvon. It hit him in the forehead with a sharp crack. "You liar!" she screamed. "You filthy liar! I did not know. I swear I did not know." She turned around. Her eyes scanned the crowd. She saw the judgment on the faces of her parent friends. She needed a lifeboat. She saw me. She walked toward the stage. She navigated the debris of her ruined wedding with the grace of a social climber. She stopped at the foot of the stairs. She looked up at me. She forced tears into her eyes. "Amara," she said, her voice trembling with a practiced fragility. "Thank God you came. Thank God you stopped him." She reached out a hand. "As if we were allies. As if we were sisters." "He fooled us both, Amara," she said. "He used me just like he used you. We are both victims here. We need to stick together. Women have to support women. I can help you testify against him. We can be a team." I looked down at her. I looked at the woman who had banned me from my own property, the woman who had called me dusty, the woman who had sneered at my existence. She was trying to pivot. She was trying to rewrite history to save her own skin. I leaned into the microphone. "Do not speak to me," I said. My voice was ice. "You are not a victim, Bianca. You are a co-conspirator who got caught. You were happy to spend the money when you thought it was real. You were happy to mock me when you thought I was poor." Bianca flinched. Her mask slipped. "But," she stammered, "I am the bride. This is my wedding day. This is an active crime scene," I corrected her. "And you are trespassing." I checked my watch. The diamonds on the bezel caught the flashing blue lights of the police cars. "You have 5 minutes, Bianca," I said. 5 minutes to get your dress, your parents, and your lies off my land. If you are still here at 8 o'clock, I will have the sheriff arrest you for criminal trespass." She stared at me. She saw no mercy. She saw only the landlord. She turned and ran. She ran across the lawn in her ruined dress. She ran toward her parents' sedan. She ran away from the wreckage of the life she thought she deserved. I stood alone on the stage. The sirens wailed. The blue lights painted the night. My brother was in a cage. My father was in cuffs. My house was mine again. The punishment was complete. The gavel came down exactly 6 months after the helicopter landed on the lawn. It was not a light sentence. The federal judge called the Legacy Growth Fund a predatory scheme designed to exploit community trust. Trayvon received 15 years in federal prison for securities fraud and identity theft. He cried when they led him away. He looked for our mother in the gallery, but she was not there. Reginald received 8 years for conspiracy and falsifying loan documents. The patriarch of the Blackwell dynasty was reduced to a federal inmate number. His legacy was nothing more than a criminal record. Bernadette did not escape. She was not charged criminally, but the civil lawsuits destroyed her completely. The investors sued for restitution. The court seized everything. The house she loved so much was sold at auction to pay back the victims. She was evicted on a rainy Tuesday. Her friends from the church did not come to help her pack. They crossed the street when they saw her coming. The woman who had obsessed over image was now invisible. She moved into a subsidized one-bedroom apartment on the south side. The walls were thin, and the carpet smelled of mildew. She had to take a job to survive. She works as a night cleaner at an office building downtown. Every night she scrubs floors and empties trash cans. It is a cruel irony. She spent her life treating me like a servant. Now she serves strangers just to keep the lights on. Then there was Bianca. The Whitmans did not forgive humiliation. Judge Whitman disowned her publicly. He cut off her trust fund and removed her from the will. He said she had brought shame to the family name by associating with criminals. Without her father money, Bianca fell hard. She tried to maintain her influencer lifestyle, but the sponsors dropped her. Now she lives in a studio apartment with 3 roommates. I saw her on social media last week. She was doing a live stream. She was trying to sell unregulated skin-lightening cream to her remaining followers. She looked tired. Her hair was unkempt. She was begging people to use her discount code so she could make rent. She went from the cover of society magazines to digital panhandling. The fall was absolute. They had all reached for the sun on wings made of wax and stolen money. Now they were drowning in the sea of their own making. I did not keep the lake house. I sold it exactly 1 week after the police raid. I did not want the ghosts of their greed haunting my hallways. I did not want to look at the lawn and see the spot where my brother tried to rob me. I sold it to a tech billionaire for $6,500,000. It was a cash deal. I took the profit and I turned it into a weapon for good. I established the Amara Foundation. It is a scholarship fund designed specifically for Black girls who are being suffocated by their families, girls who are told they are too dark or too loud or too ambitious, girls who are treated as mules for their golden siblings. I pay for their tuition. I pay for their housing. I give them the escape hatch that I had to build for myself. It is the best investment I have ever made. Now I am sitting 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. The cabin of my private jet is quiet. Across from me sits Elijah. He is no longer just my attorney. He is my partner in every sense of the word. He hands me a crystal flute filled with vintage Krug. The bubbles dance in the golden liquid. We toast to the future. We toast to a life without parasites. My phone vibrates on the walnut table. The screen lights up with a stark notification. It is a collect call request from the Federal Correctional Institution. The name Trayvon Blackwell flashes on the display. I look at it. I remember the boy who stole my college fund. I remember the man who tried to steal my home. I feel absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound and hollow silence. I press the block button. I confirm the action. I slide the phone away. I look out the window at the clouds stretching to the horizon. The sun is rising. I am untouchable. I am finally free. This story is a powerful reminder that toxic loyalty is a chain, not a virtue. Amara's journey teaches us that family isn't defined by blood, but by respect and genuine love. When those closest to you become parasites, cutting them off isn't an act of cruelty, it's an act of survival. You cannot build a future while carrying the dead weight of people who only see you as a resource. True freedom comes when you stop buying affection and start investing in your own peace. Remember, you owe nothing to those who constantly bet against you.